Hey, Jeremy Wallace here, Microsoft Certified Azure Solutions Architect Expert and Senior Cloud Infrastructure Engineer for Safari Micro. Today I'm going to be talking to you about using Azure Storage Sync with an Azure file share to move your Windows file share up into a serverless file share that's capable of doing SMB. So first of all, to get started off, we're going to need an Azure storage account. So that's what I'm creating here. And I'm going to set that to be premium. It's going to use file shares is what my purpose is. So not block blob, not page blob, file shares is what I'm going to select here. For this case, I'm just going to use locally redundant service. I'm just going to go with all the defaults here, enable public access from all networks, Microsoft routing, enable soft delete's fine for my use case here, blobs and files only. All the defaults there are fine. I'm going to tag it environment lab, purpose Azure Files, just so that I can have a good organization, be able to recall that on my billing. And I'm going to create that right now. All right, now that it's deployed, I'm going to go to the resource. I'm going to take a look. I have my file share container area here, but there's nothing in it yet. So I'm going to add a file share here. I'm just going to call this test. And let's add, let's do SML2 test. And I'm just going to provision it to 100. I'm not going to do backup for now. Let's go ahead and create that. Once my share is there, I can see that we can set up identity-based access here. So if you hit not configured, you can actually set up your identity depending on what you're using. So if you're just using traditional Active Directory, you can set that up here. It's going to bring you through the instructions that are required to join it. Or if you're using Microsoft Azure Domain Services for that serverless domain service experience, or if you're just using Microsoft Azure Kerberos, then there are some caveats to using that at this point for file shares. But those are your options for identity, and that will let you use your actual Active Directory or domain services identities in that SMB format for those file shares, just like you do with a traditional Windows file share at the moment. But I'm not going to set that up as part of this video. Maybe we'll tackle it in a different video, but just wanted to show that. Right now, so we can see my file shares there. If I browse it, it's an empty directory. There's nothing actually in it. So how do I get my files that are in my Windows server? And so I'm going to hop over there right now. So this is my Windows server. I have my test share right here, SML2 files. So how do I get this into my new Azure Files file share? Okay, well, to do that, we're going to utilize Storage Sync. And I'm logged into the portal here. I'm going to do Azure File Sync. If I go to the marketplace here, I can deploy an Azure File Sync. I need to select a resource group. For this, I'm just going to use an already existing group, and let's name this SML2 sync. All right, all networks. I'm going to have it open from tags. Normally you want to tag list stuff, but I'm going to skip that for now. I'm ready to create. All right, so it's going to deploy the Azure File Sync, and now this is where we're going to actually be able to configure the synchronization that happens from the Windows server into the Azure Files container. Okay, it's completed now, so I'm going to go into the resource. So this is my Storage Sync service. I'm going to go down to registered servers. That's the first thing, is we need to get this Windows server in here registered. So I'm going to click this link. That's going to bring me to the Azure File Sync agent. I want to download this agent. I'm going to select my Windows Server version. And then I'm going to open this file and install it. It, of course, helps if you download the one that's actually correct for your Windows Server version, which I do have now. I'm going to accept the agreement. I'm going to install the Azure File Sync. I'm going to go ahead and use the existing settings that are on here. I'm going to use the Microsoft update. Now you can select whether to have the Storage Sync agent automatically update when they become available, and you can select a certain time frame that it does it. That one's up to you on your preference and how you handle updates. All right, so now I'm going to let this install. Okay, now that it's installed. I'm going to hit finish. And then I'm going to actually have to register the agent. So this is what this next step here is what's actually going to associate it directly with my Azure portal. First checking that it's up to date. And now I'm going to do the registration. I'm going to use the Azure Cloud as the Azure Cloud environment. I'm going to hit sign in. I'm going to sign in with my credentials to my appropriate Microsoft tenant. Of course, have to do MFA. All right. Once it's signed in, I'm going to select the appropriate subscription, the resource group that I'm going to want to put it in, and then the Azure Sync service that I'm registering it to. So after it finishes registering, I'll be able to head back to the portal and I'll see it listed as a register server in there. All right. So this registration is successful. Now it's actually going to test, this is the handy part of it, it's going to test the network connectivity so that the server can communicate with the Azure storage, which it passed, so I can go ahead and close this. Now if we go back to the Azure portal and we refresh this, I can now see my server listed inside under registered servers. So where do we go from here? So I'm going to go to a sync group and I want to create a sync group. The members of the sync group is where the sync is going to happen. So technically with Azure Files, you can have multiple Windows servers as endpoints and one Azure File storage location that serves as essentially the hub, the middle part. And so files can be synced from one server up into Azure Files and down over to another. And you can actually keep a whole network of file shares the exact same. So that's one use case that you can have for this the storage sync, but in this case we're just using it mainly as a migration tool. So I'm going to go ahead and name this. I'm going to do SML2 files and I'm going to select the storage account and actually ran into a quick issue where I actually built the Azure account in the wrong region, rookie move to make, but I did correct that. So I'm selecting my Azure file share now. Storage account, file share, I'm going to create that sync group. So it's going to create that sync group with the initial cloud endpoint, which is going to be that Azure Files container. So if we drop in here, which it looks like it is created, I am going to soon see a cloud endpoint here for that Azure Files here. So you can see cloud endpoint creations in progress, cloud endpoint SML2 files. So only one sync group and to one Azure file share. So one of the things that presents is if you want to, say, sync multiple individual folders instead of one entire root folder, then you're going to want to create multiple sync groups associated with multiple individual file shares. And each of those file shares will be one root folder that you're syncing. But if you're just syncing an entire, like, FD drive or whatever drive it is, and all of the files in your share are located in that, you can just stick with a one file share method. But again, if you want to kind of split that up, you want some of those to sync into the Azure Files but not all of them, that you're going to want to create a separate file share as the root folder level essentially for each of those subfolders, and then sync those in with individual sync groups. So we're just going to take the one-to-one approach right now. So I'm going to sync all of my file share into one whole Azure file shares. So I have that cloud endpoint in here. Now I'm going to add my server endpoint. So I'm going to see my registered server. It's going to pick it up here. I can leave this as is. There's some options on whether to merge content if you had stuff already in the Azure file share, or you want to overwrite files and folders in the Azure file shares with contents on the server path. So that only really matters if you have data existing in both places. Right now I only have data existing in inside the file share. Sorry, I'm getting the path. I want the path to my files. So my D drive SML2 files, so this is the local path on the server. I'm going to hit create and it's going to add that here. All right, now that's added here as an endpoint. We can see it's in a pending state. So you'll actually be able to go into this endpoint and you'll be able to see its sync status. where it's at, how many files it's synced. It's going to start with initial upload to move those files in there. And so it has to analyze the files first. So depending on how many files you have, it could take a little bit to initialize and do the initial upload from your server. And then you also have considerations of bandwidth. If you're going from an on-premise file server, that's one thing. That my file server is in Azure. It's on the Azure backbone. It has pretty good bandwidth out, so I don't have to worry about some of those constraints. But again, depending on where you're syncing it from and where you're syncing it to, for instance, you could sync it to a place on the other side of the world, say, Central India, Azure region. So that stuff's going to affect your sync times, your initial sync times, and all of that comes into play. But just for this, again, I'm moving from a Windows file share server that's in my Azure environment into an actual Azure Files instead of a Windows file share. So yeah, I should be able to go over to the Azure File Shares, and we should start to see those files actually trickle in there. So if I go to File Share and I browse, yep, I can already see my test folder paths. So I'm on that file server here. I already see those folders. I had some test files in here, and if I hop in, I can see those test files also in there. And so you can see that sync's already taking place and moving all those folders over. Now, how about connecting to it? So you can actually map if you have an Active Directory join, and again, you have to do the setup for it. I have not done the setup on it, but once you do have it joined, you can add it here and produce a script. It'll give you a script to be able to map that. But I can use right now a storage key, so without having it added to a directory of any sort, I can use a storage key for that access, and I can use the script to actually perform that mapping. But you can see inside the script the traditional SMB file share path, // and then my file share path. So I should be able to use that inside an Explorer window once I have it joined on the network. To be able to access that and use it as a traditional file share that I can map. And I can use that in group policies, again, once it's Active Directory joined, and do all my authentication like I normally do from a Windows server, but all the files are actually stored on a serverless Azure file share, and then you're just interacting with it from your computer, whether that is an Azure Virtual Desktop or from a server, and having that mapped just like you're used to doing. And really get out of the mode of using Windows servers for your file shares. Because when you have things like SharePoint Online in Azure Files, there's no need to have to maintain an operating system and the security patching and all that stuff that goes along with the headache of maintaining a Windows file share. Move over to Azure Files. It's a huge win. And again, you can use Azure Storage Sync to help make that easy for you. Be on the lookout for future posts on Azure Files and the whole world of Azure. Again, for tips, tricks, articles, and all of that, be sure to follow me on LinkedIn.